Amen. Beautiful song. Love that song. Well, it is good to be back from vacation. And I enjoyed vacation. Last time I checked, I think Linda enjoyed vacation. But good to be back, and good to kind of be back to the routines of life and all of that. But good to take a break. Good to take a break and just kind of take a deep breath and reflect on things and the first time, Linda mentioned to me, the first time that she and I have been on a vacation without any of our kids. And that was a new experience as well. And many aspects of that wonderful. Some aspects of that we kind of like, oh, we miss the kids. But good to take time and get away and take a deep breath. I'm thankful that Dave and I didn't talk about it, but I'm thankful for that song. There's something about that name, Jesus, Jesus, Jesus. It really ties in with what I want to share with you about this morning. As we talk about a message that we need, I need, we all need, not always an easy message in our culture to hear, I think. And so it makes it an important message, but it also makes it a difficult message sometimes. Asking God to help us hear it in such a way that we accept His truth through His Word. A friend of mine made his way on a mission trip a few years back, and he'd never been on a mission trip before, never been to another culture before, and was heading towards India. They got off the plane in India, in a very rural part of India, apparently. And he said that within 5 minutes of being off of the plane, he wanted to get back on the plane and come back home. He said it was so radically different. It was so the very obvious hardships that the people deal with there, the very obvious challenges that just within 5 minutes he began to see among the people, made him want to pull back and go back to what he was used to, go back to all the things that he was privileged to have grown up around and to be able to live with each and every day of his life. But he couldn't. The plane was gone. And he said that's a good thing, because he said over the course of that week, he began to realize, because the initial questions that just he couldn't get away from in his mind, the initial questions were, why are these people who love Jesus so happy? Why are these Christians so happy? They're not sure about their jobs. The ones who do have jobs don't get paid hardly enough to even get by. They're wondering daily where they're going to get food for the next day. It's a very oppressive society in many ways. And he said, I just began to wonder, how can these people truly be happy? And yet so many of them who loved the Lord, who he would meet day after day, they were happy. They had a joy in their hearts, even though they had nothing compared to what he had. And he said about halfway through the week, he finally realized when one of them said to him, we have all that we really need. We have Jesus. And he said, what I realized was that's all they truly needed for joy and happiness. And he said, even though I was there as a Christian coming on a mission trip, I began to feel convicted about and guilty about the fact that I spent so much of my time and so much of my life trying to find happiness and joy in everything but Jesus. And he said, I realized that what we really need is Jesus. In the West, again, my friend, wonderful man of God, my friend who went through that experience, came back. He said, we wrestle with that. We struggle with that in our culture. And we do. We struggle with this idea because in our minds, if we're doing everything that is right, or that we feel like is right, we're giving it our best effort, we're working hard, we're doing the things that we're supposed to do, then life is supposed to bless us. Life is supposed to be good. Life is supposed to be wonderful. We're not supposed to have to go through difficulties and hardships and hard times. But you and I know that's not the case. We do. And so it begins this question that maybe we don't even like to ask. I believe in God, but where is He? I believe in God, but what's going on? Why do I not seem to hear from Him? Or why are there difficulties going on in my life, though I believe in God and serve Him and have lived my life for Him? Or if you're not serving the Lord, the same question phrased a little differently. If there really is God and there is, then why? Why do all these difficulties happen to me? Why do all these difficulties happen in our culture? Why do we struggle with issues and situations? So we're going to talk about Joseph, but before we do, I want to begin from this vantage point. What is God's purpose? And I just thought of a scripture. I apologize, Dave. I want to actually take you to Isaiah for a moment. Isaiah 55. And I want to start there in talking about what is God's purpose? What's He up to? Because we need to start there. And especially as we look at this part of Joseph's life, we need to start there. Isaiah chapter 55, verses 6 through 9. There it is. Thank you, Dave. Seek the Lord while He may be found. Call on Him while He is near. Let the wicked forsake his way, and the evil man his thoughts. Let him turn to the Lord. He will have mercy on him, and to our God, for He will freely pardon. Now catch this. For my thoughts are not your thoughts, neither are your ways my ways, declares the Lord. As the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways, and my thoughts than your thoughts. Isaiah 55, 6 through 9. Now, that may or may not bring any more comfort to you, but I believe it brings clarity to us as a place to begin this morning. When we begin to ask this question, what is God's purpose? What's He up to? It helps us to know because God's purpose is bigger than my life. God's purpose is bigger than the issue that I'm dealing with in this moment, in these days. God's purpose. God's purpose bring glory to His name, and by doing that, what He's doing in order for that to happen is by bringing people to Him, bringing people into a relationship with Him. And there are things that you and I are going to go through that are going to impact people around us. They're going to impact us. That are going to draw us closer to Him. They're going to mold us and shape us. They're going to humble us at times in places and ways in which we need to be humbled. There are situations that as you and I go through them, people around us watch and they see God in the midst of it. Just like my friend in India who very quickly began to see God in those people and began to realize that all that really mattered to them, they needed the food and they needed the jobs and they had very real needs and necessities, but equally necessary, absolutely the most important aspect of their lives was God. Perhaps at times that's exactly what God is doing in your life and mine when the struggles come that don't seem to be fair. Getting our attention. Where's your focus, Chris? Where's your focus? Where's your priorities? With that in mind, let's take a look at Joseph's life and where he's at, where we've been. Of course, we know from what we've been looking at in his life, we know that he was raised in very privileged status at home, hated by his brothers, eventually sold by his brothers into slavery, and ended up in Egypt, purchased as a slave in Potiphar's house. Potiphar, we found out, was a high-ranking military official in the Egyptian military, and saw the presence of God in Joseph, and that's important throughout Joseph's life. I'm going to talk about that, Joseph's choices. I'm going to talk about your choices and my choices. They impact the way we live our lives. They impact God's ability to communicate with us. They impact God's ability to work in us and through us and communicate with our world in which we're a part of. And so Joseph is now is a slave in Potiphar's house. We talked about that. We talked about how God blessed his hand and everything that he did. And so Potiphar put him in charge of everything because God had blessed him in so many ways. We talked about the temptations that came then through Potiphar's wife and how Joseph did everything right. Joseph stayed away. He ran from the temptation. He refused it. He again was in the right place spiritually. He was in that right place with his relationship with God. That he absolutely was going to refuse to do anything that would sin against God, that would be disobedient to God. And for that, he becomes a victim and ends up being accused of rape and thrown in prison. No trial, just in prison. I thought about that. How difficult that must have been, and I'm sure was for Joseph as well, to wake up in a prison knowing that you have done nothing to deserve it. You've done nothing to be there. And unsure about how it will end. And uncertainty as to if it will end. And in those moments, there were choices that he has to make. And that he will make every day. So look at it with me. Genesis chapter 39. Let's begin there. And verse number 19. When his master heard the story, his wife told him, saying, "This is how your slave treated me." He burned with anger. Joseph's master took him and put him in prison, the place where the king's prisoners were confined. But while Joseph was there in the prison, the Lord was with him, and he showed him kindness and granted him favor in the eyes of the prison warden. So the warden put Joseph in charge of all those held in the prison, and he was made responsible for all that was done there. The warden paid no attention to anything under Joseph's care, because the Lord was with Joseph and gave him success in whatever he did. Does that sound familiar? That's exactly what happened when he shows up at Potiphar's house as a slave. Potiphar recognized the hand of the Lord, recognized the presence of the Lord with him, put everything under his charge, because whatever Joseph did prospered. Why? Because he was obedient to the Lord and because God was with him and blessed him. So you mean even in a difficult situation like a prison cell where he doesn't deserve to be there, he shouldn't be there, but is there, God still blesses him in spite of where he's at and what's going on? Yes. Because of Joseph's choices and God's power. You see, I believe Joseph is choosing to trust God no matter what happens. He has to, or his attitude would not be what it is. I'm going to trust God no matter what. I'm going to choose to trust. I'm going to choose to have faith. You see, it's not about fair. We have a problem in our culture sometimes. So many people want to be the victim. They want to be the victim. They seem to revel in being the victim. And part of that, when it comes to being the victim, is expecting other people to take pity and to fix whatever the problem is. And there are times when people are victimized. There are times when it's reality. Certainly Joseph is a victim in this situation. Certainly Joseph is not in a situation that's fair. But that's not what it's about. It's not about fair. It's about God's purpose. And God's purpose is bigger than what Joseph can see. God's purpose is bigger than the moment Joseph is living in. God's purpose is bigger than the situation Joseph finds himself in. And so often that's the case for you and me too. We just can't see it. Joseph couldn't see it either. What Joseph was faced with was, how will I deal with this situation? How will I deal with this day? And when tomorrow shows up, how will I deal with this day? And when tomorrow shows up, how will I deal with this day? Day by day, moment by moment. And his choice became not about fair or unfair. His choice became, I will choose to trust God is with me. I see God's hand with me. I know God is with me. So there has to be something God is doing in and through this situation. Faith and obedience, that I will choose. You see, and this is so important, Joseph couldn't do anything about his situation. What he could do was, how am I going to deal with my situation? And he chose to deal with his situation through faith and obedience. I'm going to choose to live right, trust God, and let God take care of the rest. And in the midst of that prison, he becomes the warden in a sense. Oh, not in name. The warden is the warden. The captain of the guard is the captain. He is, but he becomes the one in charge because the warden saw the hand of God upon him. Now, I want you to see what happens next. I want you to see what's taking place in that prison. Sometime later, the cupbearer and the baker of the king of Egypt offended their master, the king of Egypt. Pharaoh was angry with his two officials, the chief cupbearer and the chief baker, and he put them in custody in the house of the captain of the guard, in the same prison where Joseph was confined. The captain of the guard assigned them to Joseph, and he attended them. Now these two positions are very important positions. In many ways, you didn't want to be in these positions. The cupbearer was the one who literally was, in some ways, he had to be a very trusted individual because he tasted all the king's food. He drank from the wine or the drink, whatever it was that the king was going to drink. The cupbearer would taste it first. Because in that culture, in that day and age, if you didn't like somebody, the easiest way perhaps to get rid of them would be to poison them. And so the cupbearer became this trusted individual who would taste the food, drink the drink, and as long as he didn't fall over dead, the king knew he could eat it and drink it. It was very trusted. It was someone that you genuinely had great trust in. Nehemiah was a cupbearer for the king. And actually was an advisor and a friend of the king. That was often the case. The chief baker, it wasn't about cake so much as it was the food. The chief baker was in charge of all the food. So both these individuals end up in prison. They've offended the king. They've upset the king. We have no idea what's going on or why, but they're in prison. And they're in prison with Joseph. And Scripture's going on, says, after they've been in custody for some time, each of the two men, the cupbearer and the baker of the king of Egypt, who were held in prison, had a dream the same night, and each dream had a meaning of its own. When Joseph came to them the next morning, he saw they were dejected, so he asked Pharaoh's officials who were in custody with him in his master's house, "Why are your faces so sad today?" "We both had dreams," they answered, "but there is no one to interpret them." Then Joseph said to them, "Do not interpretations belong to God? Tell me your dreams." I think there's another place where we see the perspective of Joseph. He doesn't say, "I can interpret the dreams." He doesn't say, "I have wisdom to interpret the dreams." He says, is not God the one who interprets dreams? Tell me your dreams. I'll speak to God about them, is what he's basically saying. And so he's told these dreams, and in these dreams, well, look at it with me there. So the chief cupbearer told Joseph his dream. He said, "In my dream I saw a vine in front of me, and on the vine were 3 branches. As soon as it budded, it blossomed, and its clusters ripened into grapes. Pharaoh's cup was in my hand. I took the grapes, squeezed them into Pharaoh's cup, put the cup in his hand." This is what it means, Joseph said to them, "The 3 branches, 3 days. Within 3 days, Pharaoh will lift up your head and restore you to your position, and you will put Pharaoh's cup in his hand, just as you used to when you were his cupbearer. But when all goes well with you, remember me, show me kindness, mention me to Pharaoh. Get me out of this prison, for I was forcibly carried off from the land of the Hebrews, and even here I have done nothing to deserve being put in a dungeon." The chief baker saw that Joseph had given a favorable interpretation. He said to Joseph, "I too had a dream. On my head were 3 baskets of bread. In the top basket were all kinds of baked goods for Pharaoh, but the birds were eating them out of the basket on my head." "This is what it means," Joseph said. "The 3 baskets are 3 days. Within 3 days, Pharaoh will lift off your head and hang you on a tree, and the birds will eat away your flesh." Now the 3rd day was Pharaoh's birthday, and he gave a feast for all of his officials. He lifted up the heads of the chief cupbearer and the chief baker in the presence of his officials. He restored the chief cupbearer to his position, so they once again put the cup into the Pharaoh's head. But he hanged the chief baker just as Joseph had said to them in his interpretation. Very important verse here. The chief cupbearer, however, did not remember Joseph. He forgot him. He forgot him. Joseph comes to them and he says, "I can interpret your dreams because of God. God has given me that blessing. And so here's what your dreams mean." And then his humanity comes. Joseph is a hero of the faith to me, absolutely. A powerful example of what it is to walk with the Lord. But that doesn't take away his humanity. And he says to the cupbearer, "When you're restored to your position, please speak to Pharaoh. Where I'm at, what's happened to me, it isn't fair, it's unjust. please speak to Pharaoh, remember me. He does get restored to his position. Joseph's interpretation of his dream is accurate. But then it says he forgot him. Now, God didn't forget him. The cupbearer forgot him. Because the time was not yet right. God's got a plan. You're going to, if you want to read ahead, you can. I'm going to talk to you about it next week. God has a plan in all of this. It's an amazing plan with Joseph. But it required Joseph to be where he is so that God could use him. You say, well, that's not fair. He was unjustly accused. You're right. And God saw that coming. But you see, Joseph is going to have a moment. The cupbearer will remember Joseph. The moment will come when the cupbearer will have an opportunity to say, oh, by the way, let me tell you about Joseph. And Joseph is going to have his opportunity with Pharaoh. It's going to happen. But in God's time, in God's way, so that God is able to work out an amazing miracle through Joseph. What's the point? I don't know, maybe you're not like me. I'm not always very patient. I want things to happen yesterday. I want answers to prayer yesterday. I want situations resolved yesterday. I don't want to think about the fact that God's plan is perhaps not about yesterday or today, but it's about tomorrow, 6 months, 3 weeks, a year. I don't know. And perhaps, I know, some of you perhaps who are listening, you're dealing with difficult situations. You're going through hard places. And I know that. I'm aware of that. And across the years, I've had so many, and I get it. Another pastor, a friend who, not too far from here, he battled this virus for 4 months. Friend in Kentucky, plant he was working out closed down, moved out of the country. 2 weeks later, pain in his abdomen. Went to the doctor. Actually, it wasn't 2 weeks, it was 2 months. Colon cancer. No insurance. I mean, on and on. And you can do that too. You know people. You've been through situations. You're aware of times when life is wonderful and great and amazing times and times of celebration and joy and all that we want it to be, and times of struggle. Can I challenge you in the times of struggle? God has not abandoned you. If you're serving Him, walking with Him, God has not abandoned you. God is with you. But there's a plan at work. There's a plan taking place. And it's a work God is doing that you may not be aware of. It may be bigger than your situation. It entirely probably is. And what he's merely asking you to do is choose faith and choose obedience. Choose faith. Choose obedience. I close with this. I think of another hero of mine, in Job. And Job was very wealthy and large family, and scriptures tell us that he had everything a person could possibly want. And faithful to God, worshiped the Lord. But Satan told the Lord one day, he said, obviously Job will worship you. You've blessed him with everything. He wants for nothing. But if you take all that away, he'll curse you. God says, go ahead. You can take everything but his life, but you will see that I know Job, and Job will not curse me. And in the course of a very short time, Job loses all of his wealth. He loses his children. He has very painful sores all over his body that give him constant pain. His friends turn against him, and they think they're doing the right thing by telling him, you need to find out what it is that you've done to anger God, and God will spare you all of this. And Job has a choice in the midst of all this, because Job doesn't know what's going on. His wife comes to him, says, why don't you just give up and die? Curse God and die. Job makes a statement, though he slay me, will I serve him? Will I worship him? God doesn't slay him. God restores him after a time. But he made a statement, I will be obedient. I will choose faith no matter how dire my situation gets. And God will bring me through this time. And he will you as well. He will you as well. And you will sense him closer than he's ever been if you walk with him and lean on him and trust him. That's my prayer. If you don't know him this morning, I challenge you to invite Jesus into your life. Ask him to forgive you of your sin. Commit to live for him. And he will draw near to you. That's what he wants. That's what he wants. Let's pray together. Father, thank you